Okay. Okay, we looks like we're all set. Let's begin the class. Today's class is on two parshiot, Vayakhel and Pekudei, as we conclude Chazak Chazak and say Chazak Chazak as we conclude Sefer Shemot. Next week we begin Sefer Vayikra, very exciting, especially for our class. There's a lot of material in Vayikra about food and nutrition and kashrut in the Parsha in the parshiot of Sefer Vayikra. Meanwhile, these particular two parshiot don't have very much, but what they have is also very important. We might not have a full hour class today, but that's okay. We'll learn what we can learn, and if you have questions, especially Pesach is coming up, you might have questions to ask. They are food related. We'll pause the live stream to Facebook at that point, and we'll go from there. All right, so without any further ado, let's get into Parshat uh, Vayakhel. Again, this is the end of Shemot, Sefer Shemot. Again, the Jewish people have built the Mishkan, or they're building the Mishkan. It's finally built in this week's Parsha. They have all the instructions and everything. And so here is the final accounting and final putting all the pieces, all the loose pieces of the Mishkan are put together to create the Mishkan, this traveling tabernacle with which the Jews carried and traveled in the Midbar. Um, it's worth noting, even though it's not really food related per se, that the uh, the um, the Jewish people building the Mishkan at this point is does not necessarily seem to be a good way to end a book. This is the conclusion of the Exodus. This is the end of Shemot, right? What does it have to do with the Exodus? So the Ramban points out, especially in his introduction to this book, is that just freeing the Jews from Mitzrayim is not the goal. Hashem didn't want us to just be free. Freedom doesn't come just from not being a servant. Freedom comes from being a servant to Hashem. Therefore, the entire book of Shemot ends with our recognizing this and feeling Hashem's Shekhinah being shochen, being dwelling among us with the building of the Mishkan. That's the whole point, is not just to be free to do whatever you want, but to elevate yourself spiritually to a holier level that you could actually feel, which is what happened to the Jewish people at the end of Sefer Shemot, which is what real freedom is supposed to taste like. Now, it's especially relevant when you have people, especially people who question Torah Judaism. They'll ask questions like, Pesach is supposed to be the celebration of our freedom. How come we have so many laws? How come we have so many restrictions? Why did that happen? The answer is very simple. Our freedom isn't freedom from everything. Our freedom is freedom from the mundane, freedom from the non-holy. Our freedom we feel when we're doing holy things, when we're listening to Hashem. Whether we understand the mitzvot or we don't understand the mitzvot, even just knowing that we're listening to the king and fulfilling his decree is good enough reason for us to feel free. That rhymes. Interesting. All right. I said a bracha before, by the way, in case you're wondering. All right, so Vayakhel is a parsha in which the Torah teaches lessons in the significance of food-related Shabbat mitzvot, the health benefits of washing hands, and more. Important stuff. Let's get right into it. Very beginning of Vayakhel, Moshe tells the Jewish people, Sheshet Yamim Ta'aseh Melacha, for 6 days your work shall be done. Vayom Hashvi Yelachem, and the 7th day shall be for you, Kodesh, Shabbat Shabbaton. It should be a Sabbath of Sabbaths for you. La Hashem Kol Usa B'Melacha Yumat. It is for Hashem, and anybody who does work will be punished with the death penalty. Of course, this is not just Taliban style. You see somebody, flipping on a light switch on Shabbat, you can kill him. There's a whole court process. There's witnesses. There's warning. It isn't if somebody forgot. It isn't for somebody who's trying to commit suicide by court or anything like that. There are good reasons to punish somebody in that time. And this is more of a warning. And of course, the court would rarely kill people, especially for something like this. A court, they say in the Talmud that a court that killed somebody once in 70 years was considered a bloody court. So 70 years between death penalties is a long time. All right. Anyway, in this verse, Hashem seems to emphasize that Hashem is a day for us, lachem, right? It is a day for you. It should, and one moment, let's see, make sure everybody's in who wants to be in. Sometimes I get texts in the middle of the class from people who were not able to get in. So I just want to make sure that Ruby is not alone in knowing how to navigate the the link. All right, so let's go on. So here Hashem is saying, right, Shabbat Shabbaton. But before that, no, Yom Hashvi, Yom Hashvi Yeh Lachem. That this seventh day is for you, Kodesh, holy. So it sounds like Shabbat is for us. Elsewhere, and when we're talking about elsewhere, we're talking about in the Aseret HaDibrot, in the Ten Commandments earlier in chapter 20 of this book. Hashem calls Shabbat la Hashem, for Hashem. The exact phrase is V'yom hashvi Shabbat la Hashem Elokecha. The seventh day is a Shabbat for Hashem your God. So who's it for? For you or for Hashem? And the answer is yes. What do I mean? Based on the halakhic principle that those who spend their week learning should use Shabbat for physical enjoyment like sleep and food, whereas those who work most of the week should, on the contrary, utilize Shabbat for more spiritual purposes. Conversely, I should say. That's a good word, right? Utilize Shabbat for more spiritual things. This verse applies for the Torah scholar, where the Torah scholar needs to hear that Shabbat is for you. Enjoy it. It's yours. You've earned it. You've learned Torah all week long. You've been spiritual all week long. This is a day for you to enjoy the physical world, eat your meal, sleep, etc. And obviously related to food, as we'll see shortly. But definitely already we have this idea that Shabbat is supposed to be a day for physical enjoyment for the Torah scholar. Whereas the above-cited verse, the one in the Aseret HaDibrot, applies for the layman, which makes more sense, by the way, right? The Aseret HaDibrot would be for the general populace, the layman, whereas this verse is much more specific, much more centered on the Torah scholar. So the layman is supposed to use Shabbat for holy purposes, spend as much time as possible learning and catching up on the spirituality that he or she might have missed during the week of work. Writes the Taam V'dat, the eating should also be sanctified on Shabbat. We just finished saying that you don't have to, you can enjoy your Shabbat for physical pleasure, Mr. Torah scholar. Says the Taam V'dat, no, that's not totally true. Part of the physical pleasure can also be very spiritual. Eating can be sanctified on Shabbat. How? An interesting reason that he cites from Rabbeinu Yonah for why we have 3 meals altogether on Shabbat, maybe to compel a person to eat less at lunch and be able to better sanctify Shabbat by studying Torah until the 3rd meal. Right? You have a gap. You have some time that you need to spend. You can't just eat your lunch and sleep until Shabbat is over. You need to stay up so to eat this 3rd meal. And to do that, you have to do something in between. What are you going to do? So eat a little less during lunch, and that will compel you. That'll give you that extra time to make a chavrusa shaf, something. Learn with somebody. Learn on your own. Learn with your kids. Learn with your spouse. Right? This is the time for that. Similarly, one shouldn't waste too much time eating the entire week. During the week, you don't have to spend so much time eating. If you have a 30-minute lunch break, doesn't mean you have to eat all 30 of those minutes. In general, by suppressing one's natural inclinations, one's eating becomes sanctified. The time of the third meal, and especially at dusk, is a time of favor should not be wasted, but rather spent eating the third meal, which is a mitzvah, studying inspiring Torah topics, or saying Tehillim. There's lots to do during that time. You shouldn't have to. You shouldn't waste it. This particular time is especially prone to receiving the holiness of the Shabbat. All right, one other comment on this verse, and it's there's the phraseology is a little bit strange. Many of the commentaries focus on the reflexive form Hashem and His Torah uses here, writing 6 days shall work be done, instead of you shall do your work for 6 days. It's 6 days your work shall be done. Sounds a little bit awkward, sounds a little bit strange. So perhaps Hashem uses this grammatical structure to indicate that success does not come from our work. Rather, we do work in order to cover up the miracle of Hashem supporting us. And He is the source of our success, making the work become completed for us. So it's Sheshet Yamim, let's look at the phrase again. Right? Sheshet Yamim taseh melacha. For 6 days, your work will be done. Not necessarily by you. You think you do your work, but your work is actually done, is actually completed, not by you, but by Hashem. This is a very deep philosophical idea, but it is the cornerstone of all Jewish emunah, faith, right? Is this idea that all of our efforts, all of the amount of work we do, the amount of effort we put into any project, any program, or anything else, is just that. It's just effort. It's called hishtadlut. We have a mitzvah. It's actually a curse, right? Since the time of Adam HaRishon, that he was cursed that by the sweat of his brow he would eat his bread. What that means is bread will come. Hashem will provide always, but we work in order to make it seem like He's not. We cover it up. We cover up that miracle that He would support us anyway. There are people who, without going to work at all and not being heirs to a fortune or anything like that, there's people out there who have the emunah, have the faith that they don't have to work and they can focus their lives on spiritual things, and they're right, they do, and they survive, and they grow, and they can even become wealthy, all because they know what they're supposed to do. There are people on the other extreme who work all day and night and never feel like they have enough. They always feel they're always in debt. They're always poor, and they're working and they're working, and nothing seems to come of it. And all kinds of situations like that occur as well. And the one reason might be because they haven't really realized that all their work is just supposed to be to cover up. They have to put in a minimum amount of work to make it seem like they earned their bread, and Hashem will provide for them. That's how it works. And there's many stories like that of great people who were able to sort of control their natural desire to work and work and work, and they were rewarded for it with financial stability and success. Okay, next verse gives us a very interesting mitzvah of Shabbat. It says, "Lo tevaru eish b'chol moshvotechem b'yom haShabbat." Do not put on a fire in any of your places where you live on the day of Shabbat. Now, a lot of people use this. A lot of people outside of Orthodox Judaism, anyway, use this as a proof text that Shabbat is about difficult work. Right? Don't do any difficult work on Shabbat. Anything else is fine. Right? It used to be, they'll say, they're wrong, but they will say, it used to be difficult to start a fire. You had to get 2 pieces of flint, and you had to rub them against each other. You had to take sticks and roll them around in the dirt. You had to wait for a lightning storm. Now, I don't know how difficult it was for ancient man to make fire. apparently in the time of the Torah, they already kind of had it figured out, right? They knew about coals. They knew they knew how to keep a fire going. They had ovens already, right? Whatever it is that Nimrod threw Abraham into the fiery furnace. Obviously, they were able to keep nice and warm somehow. So I don't know exactly um, how difficult this must have been. But I will say this that uh, they had it figured out by then. They definitely had it figured out by then. So so that's not the reason why fire is not allowed on Shabbat because it's very difficult. Fire is somehow, and we'll talk about this in some detail now. Fire is somehow the the how do I put this? It's the model for all other things that you can't do on Shabbat. There are 39 avot malachot. We spoke about this before when we were speaking about the Sefer Dibro, the Ten Commandments. We talked about there how Shabbat was especially the first few of the 39 malachot had to do with food. So there's more to it than that, actually. That as the Ramban points out in the Parsha here, that even the preparation of food is forbidden on Shabbat, since fire is needed in the preparation of all food. In other words, as opposed to other holy days, all the other holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Shmini Atzeret, Sukkot, I'm going backwards here, out of order, Pesach, Shavuot, and all of these holidays, you are allowed to prepare food. You're allowed to use fire. Can't start a fire. Okay, we'll talk about that when we get to it. But you are allowed to use a fire. On Shabbat, fire is not allowed to be used at all, which is unique. And it leads to other things. For example, carrying. The reason we can't carry on Shabbat is because for the same reason, because we're not allowed to prepare food, and so we're not allowed to carry food. We're not allowed to unless we have an eruv, etc. Then you're not carrying. I'm not going to get into all the halachic details of this, but whenever you're allowed to prepare food, you're allowed to carry food, as on Yom Tov, which is why you're allowed to carry, because you're allowed to carry food. It all comes back to that. Now, preparation of food on Shabbat, as I said, is unique as opposed to all other holidays. So, for example, on any other holiday, if you have a fire going, you can use it. You can't turn it down. You can't turn it up. Whatever. You can't turn it off. Right? Maybe you can turn it up. You can put more coals into it. You can keep it going. Whatever. That's fine. But once it's going on a Yom Tov, you can cook on it. You can boil. You can bake. You can do whatever you want with it. You can. I mean, not whatever you want, but any food related task that's necessary, you can do on Yom Tov. You can even, I don't want to gross you out, but you can even shecht an animal on Yom Tov. Right? If you run out of food, or even if you don't run out of food, you want a particular animal to eat that you think is going to taste better, or you have guests to feed, you can shecht, skin, salt, and prepare an animal from scratch on Yom Tov. Do people often do that? Probably not. It's a lot of work. It's not so simple. But it is in theory, at least, it is something that can be done. So therefore, that's what Shabbat is. Shabbat is different than that. Shabbat, you can't flay an animal, you can't cut an animal, you can't. Almost all of the malachot, we talked about this again before, but almost all of the malachot of Shabbat have something to do with not getting food prepared, not doing any malacha at all. Malacha is considered creative work, and making a meal, making food, is actually, that's right, creative. Right? It's the culinary arts, right? It is a creative thing. So you're not allowed to create anything on Shabbat, and that includes food. And for that, and to make food, you need to have fire. Almost every kind of food you can imagine that we eat is uses fire somehow. I know there was a diet recently. Forget what it's called now. Oh, there's so many crazy diets out there. But there was a diet recently that within the last 10 years, we had a guest who was keeping this diet. Was it paleo? Was it paleo diet? I don't remember now. I think paleo. And the person said that they can't eat anything that a caveman wouldn't eat. So they can't eat anything. And I said, does that include bread? Says, no, no, I can have bread. I can have cavemen ate bread. I'm like, no, I'm not. I don't know if they did. That would require fire, and I'm pretty sure cavemen, if they existed, did not have fire. Right? If they did, they didn't know what to do with it. They wouldn't know how to control it, and they wouldn't know that crops are something that you can mill and then bake with yeast into and water into something. There's an incredible amount of ingenuity that would be necessary to make bread, and I don't think cavemen had that personally. Well, maybe they did. Yeah, you never know. All right. But there's all kinds of foods a caveman wouldn't eat. Any food that's cooked or spiced or anything like that. So I don't know. I don't think that diet lasted very long. Anyway, probably lasted about as long as the cavemen. It went extinct. So uh, the I think I don't even know. So it's okay not to know things sometimes. So, but Shabbat is a time for food. We just talked about that with the third meal, very important meal of the day. But aside from that, Shabbat requires a certain degree of care when it comes to preparation. And there's a few books on the subject. Probably the classic, which has like a now an updated version. Um, has an updated version, but the classic old cover looks like this, right? It's a little blurry here. It's called the Shabbos Kitchen. Oh, it is too blurry. I can't. It's probably because of the filter. Sorry, just trying to filter out the background light, the mirror behind me. So the the Shabbat Kitchen by Rabbi Simcha Bunim Cohen. It's probably the classic on the subject, and I wanted to incorporate it into the book. I didn't get a chance today, unfortunately, but at least we can take a look at some of the topics and see how it's a vast topic. Obviously, even this book, as good as it is, does not cannot really um, fully uh, do the justice that this needs. So let's look. Um, Right. So cooking, right? So first of all, cooking is a necessary part of Shabbat of food, right? Reheating, baking, covering a pot. A pot is on a blech, say, right? And you uncovered it. Can you put the cover back on? Because what you're doing by putting the cover back on is you're increasing the heat inside to the point where maybe you'll start cooking what's inside. So the halacha is that if you took the pot, if you want to take the lid off a pot, you have to have in mind that you're going to put it back. And you have to take the whole pot off of the blech, take off the pot top, right? Having in mind that you're going to put it back, not let go of either of the pot nor the top. And I just realized it's the same letters, just backwards, pot and top. Anyway, so I wonder if that was intentional. Either way, you put the top back on the pot, the cover back on the pot, and you put it back on the blech, all along realizing you're going to return it. That you can only do that, by the way, if the food inside the pot is a solid, right? Because there is a possibility of recooking, of cooking liquid that wasn't cooked yet, as opposed to a dry thing cannot be recooked once it's cooked already. Correct? So that's one interesting halacha, and again, that's not true for Yom Tov. On Yom Tov, you can take the pot off, take the pot on, take off the top, take out, put on the pot, the top, whatever, anything you want to do, almost anything you want to do, as long as it's for food on Yom Tov, you can use fire like that, especially with a blech. There's concepts of kli rishon, kli sheni, kli shlishi, right? So if you want to say make something that is already cooked, but it can dissolve in hot water, you may do that in order to make, for example, coffee. Okay, coffee or perhaps tea. Tea's a little more complicated. Let's stick with coffee for now. If you have coffee, the coffee it's the instant coffee, the only kind you can really make on Shabbat. So you take the coffee, you pour hot water into one vessel. So the vessel that you're pouring from is a kli rishon. It's the temperature is 212 degrees or higher. It's boiling point. It's boiling water. You pour it into a cup, which in theory now will cool it down to the point where that cup is called a kli sheni. That hot water from that kli sheni is then poured into a third cup, right? That third cup is a kli shlishi, means third vessel. You're welcome. I did the math for you. And into there you can put in the instant coffee and the creamer or whatever else, sugar if you need, whatever you put into it in order to drink your coffee. That's how you would make coffee on Shabbat. That's as opposed to Yom Tov, when you can scoop right into the Kli Rishon if you somehow could without turning on any lights or anything. Right? You can pour right into a Kli Sheni, and into that Kli Sheni you can pour in liquid, solids, etc. There might even be a way on Yom Tov to make coffee from beans. I don't know how, but depending on the technology, and again, that's a completely different issue. Um, okay. To reheat food, you can do that on Shabbat, but only if it's a solid food. You can take it out of the refrigerator, cold. It's cooked, but it's cold. Say a kugel out of the refrigerator. It's dry, and then dry doesn't mean it has to be completely like beef jerky dry. Dry just means that there's no pooled moisture on the bottom, or not a lot of it anyway. And you can put that onto a blech, and it'll warm up after a few hours. That's perfectly fine. You can do that on Shabbat itself. On Yom Tov, you can take a soup out of the refrigerator, right? Liquid, cold, uncooked, and put it on a blech to cook from scratch if you wanted to. And that would be fine. Again, there's a lot of differences with food preparation on Shabbat versus Yom Tov, and especially versus the rest of the week. Which again, food and Shabbat are very much connected to each other. Insulating is also having to do with fire and food on Shabbat. Insulating is allowed before Shabbat, but on Shabbat you're not allowed to insulate. You're also, by the way, not allowed to insulate before Shabbat in a way that would increase the heat of the food to the point of cooking it on Shabbat itself. That's a little more complicated. I don't think most people really do that anymore. But the Gemara talks about using wet mud. Wet mud apparently increase the heat of items when you put it deep enough into the mud, I guess. Also related to Shabbat, we not exactly related to heating, but sorting. We talked a little bit about that before. You know, the picking out foods you don't want from a collection of food in a bowl. Let's say you have there's a fruit salad and you don't like the cherries, so you're cherry picking. You're taking the cherries out of the fruit salad, right? So you're not allowed to do that unless you're picking out the cherries because you want the cherries. So you are allowed to grab from a collection something you do want, but you're not allowed to on Shabbat select and sort from for things you don't want. And we talked about some of these other things as well in the past. We talked about squeezing fruit for their juice. It's in particular a problem with grapes and olives because wine and olives have olive oil have a unique Torah Torah verses about them. There's a Torah prohibition about it. Other fruit juices aren't necessarily so. When it comes to grapes and when it comes to olives, the assumption that the Torah has, at least this is the way it used to be for most of human history, is that grapes and olives are primarily for their juice. That is what they are for. People didn't used to like munch on grapes or munch on olives like they do nowadays. They would particularly use these things for their juice. That being the case, those things are forbidden on a much higher level, as opposed to lemons, which are also forbidden, but they're rabbinically forbidden to be squeezed for their juice. But it's not as much of a problem. Sometimes I'll tell you at a kiddush, if there's grapes at a kiddush and they fall on the floor, people have to be a lot more careful not to step on them, as opposed to say a kiwi or something falls on the floor. You don't have to shave it on Shabbat. Okay, nobody's shaving the kiwi. Good. All right. Okay. Grinding. Mashing that we're not allowed to do on Shabbat either. That includes mashed potatoes, etc. Unless they've already been ground and then they just got stuck back together, you can break them apart again. And there are times, of course, mashing things, especially for children, is a necessity. And there are ways you could do it with a shino, with the back of a spoon, etc. Again, this is only relevant for Shabbat. What's one of the things that makes Shabbat special, again, because of this verse of Lo Tuvaru Eish. And that's an important thing. Cutting food is allowed unless you're making special shapes or unless you're cutting them very finely like a professional would. If you know how to cut like Israeli salad or pico de gallo or something into very small cubes, then perhaps you should do that before Shabbat if you want to have that kind of food. Otherwise, just cut it normal, like a normal person. It tastes the same either way. Uh, my unprofessional opinion on that subject. Kneading dough, of course. And really handling raw dough is rabbinically forbidden because of muktzah. It's useless on Shabbat. There's nothing you can do with raw dough on Shabbat. So you shouldn't handle it at all. You can't marinate or salt things. Obviously, you're allowed to use salt at a meal while you're eating, but to salt things like with a great amount of salt to the point where it becomes inedible, basically, is basically you're marinating it, you're pickling it, and that's not allowed on Shabbat either. It's actually considered salt is considered in some ways a a kind of heat transfer which makes it so that it's basically cooking. Again, based on our verse here, that cooking, starting a fire in order to cook, is the classic prohibition um, uh, for uh, for that for Shabbat. Okay. Um, um, Yeah, there's more. There's a lot more. That's just some of the basics. Just so we get a little taste of some of the things that are forbidden. I want to emphasize again, and I think I started by trying to say this. I don't know if I said it enough. Um, Somebody asked me recently if if driving a car, um, if driving a car is a problem of starting a fire because of this verse, so then why is uh, so then why is what if the car is already started from before Shabbat? Can somebody use the car then? Let's say it's an electric car that can, I don't know, somehow last through the whole day. Can you just use the electric car? The fire's already started. And the answer is no. Very flatly, no. That's not the problem of starting a fire. You're not starting a fire when you start a car. Yes, there is an ignition. So technically, literally, it is the ignition of a fire in the engine. But that's not the problem of starting a car. The problem of starting a car on Shabbat or using a car on Shabbat is, as is often the case with new technology, the use of the completion of a circuit, right? When you put that key in the ignition and turn the switch, you're completing an electric circuit that allows the thing to start moving. More than that, every time you press on the gas, assuming it's gas, right? You're depleting the oil that's there, and depleting oil in a reservoir of oil. So even like pouring out wax, burnt oil, or the oil in a candle, right? To pour out some of it in order for the oil, the candle to last a little bit less, for it to go out sooner, so you can go to so you can have less light and go to sleep earlier or whatever. That's also not allowed on Shabbat. So it's not every malacha has to do with fire, but in some ways, fire, like I said, is the model for why something would be not allowed. And really, fire has to do, as according to the Ramban, as we just talked about, the preparation of food. There are a lot of food-related malachot that have to do with Shabbat, and all of them come from this verse, again, in relation to food. And our commentary of the Taam Dagan, we have quite a bit to say on the subject here. And there's more to say, and God willing, there are a lot of other references in the Torah, in the Parshiot to come. There'll be a lot more references to Shabbat, and hopefully we'll handle them as they appear. Okay, chapter 35, verse 22. Verse says, "Vayavo hanashim al hanashim." The men and the women came together. Kol nadiv lev. All the people who had, who were inspired in their hearts to give. Heviu chach. They brought nose rings, v'nezem, and earrings, and tabat, and regular rings, the kumas called kli zahav, and kumas, and all kinds of golden vessels. Ish asher henift nufat zahav l'Hashem. Every man brought an offering of gold to Hashem. So the commentary here, is it? Who says this? I think Rashi. No, Rav Moshe Feinstein. Right, Rav Moshe Feinstein. Zechet Tzaddik Levracha. Yahrzeit was last week, 40th yahrzeit, right? The women wore jewelry they donated to show that they were not giving discarded items, but objects for which they still had high regard. You can see in the verse, right, that they came, the men and women had this jewelry, then the men gave, from their hands gave, right, offerings of gold. It doesn't say that the women gave from their hands. Why not? So it says Rav Moshe Feinstein, they weren't giving them in their hands because they weren't carrying them in their hands. They were literally still wearing them on their bodies. Why were they wearing them on their bodies? To show that this is real stuff. It's not like it's something I don't care about. I'm not going to use it anymore. It's trash. It's it's garnished. It's chashuv to me. It's important to me. I'm still wearing it. I'm going to take it right off of my ears and give it for the Mishkan. The connection of this to food is a little tenuous, I'll admit, right? It's not 100% about food, but it's about physical things in general. We need to realize that our world is a physical world, and it's been given to us to do spiritual things with it. Whether it's our food, where we're supposed to make brachot or tzedakah with it, as we'll talk about shortly when we get to Pekudei, or whether it's or whether it's our gold and jewelry, and that we're supposed to give tzedakah with it and use it for holy purposes to look respectable, even in times when we're not respected, etc. Next verse says, "V'chol anashim asher nasa libam utana b'chachma tavu et ha'izim." All the women who were whose heart, pushed them, stirred them up with wisdom, spun the goat's hair. So that's the goats that were used for the Mishkan. The wool that was used for the Mishkan was spun um, on from the goat. Now the derivation. So an interesting point. Who says this? The Sforno. Very nice. It's an interesting point. I didn't really clarify this very much. Um, Let me write this down first. The women spun the wool directly from the goats. It's not like they shaved the goats and then took the wool and washed it and took care of it and then spun it. They right from the goat. They're like, there's the goat, and they're like spinning it right off of them into wool. Now, why would they do that? So the Sforno explains because the derivation of it, the closer you are to the original source of something, the better it is. And his proof for that is that the derivation of a food is always weaker than the actual source. So a derivative, right? A food derivative isn't the thing itself. So, reconstituted orange juice doesn't give you the same nutritional value as an orange, right? Ah, 1 second. Right. 1 second. I'm gonna just fix this a little bit. There we go. This is why we do this, right? This is why we have the class. So Rabbi Yeti can waste everybody's time to do some fixing here. All right. The thing is always weaker than the original. Just want to make it clear for the future. Yeah. Good. Okay. Okay, next verse tells us the Hanisim heviu et avnei hashoham vet avnei hamiluim le'ephod v'lachoshen. The princes brought the stone, the shoham, the onyx stone, and the stones to be set for the ephod and for the breastplate. They brought again, the princes brought these gifts. That was what the princes brought. Now, without the letter yud, the word for princes also means clouds, right? Which is how it's, by the way, spelled here. And this is because this oil, right, the oil is, you don't see oil in this verse, but the oil that's mentioned in the next verse, that's not the only thing they brought. In chapter 35, verse 28, it says they also brought oil for the illumination, for the menorah, etc. So when they brought that, that's why the Nisim is spelled here without a yud, because without a yud, it also means clouds. And there's a midrash that says or actually a Gemara in Yoma 275a, also the Targum Yonatan. That's the Aramaic uh, translation slash commentary on the Torah. So he also brings up that this oil, they didn't get this oil, olive oil, in the midbar. It's not easy to get olive oil without olive trees. So and especially the amount that they needed to have. So the Gemara there says that they got this from clouds from Gan Eden. However, the oil needs to grow naturally on trees. So you can't just use this oil. You can't use magical spiritual oil for this physical mitzvah. That's what, like we just finished saying, that's what physical stuff on earth is for. So perhaps this miraculous oil is only used for this unique occasion, says the Taam V'dat. He kind of wonders why this oil can be used at all. So it's only maybe for this once, for this, for one time, for this unique occasion, it can be used. But in the future, we're gonna use only normal natural oil. All right, it's a good name for an oil company, by the way. Gan Eden Oil. No, all right, just think about it. All right, chapter 38, verse 8. I think that's our last comment here on Vayakhel. V'yas et hakior nechoshet. He made this the kior. That's what the laver, the sink that the kohanim would wash their hands and feet from. Ve'et kano nechoshet, and the base of it was brass, and it was made from brass. Hatzov ot, made from mirrors. Asher tzavu, that the women would bring. Petach oil moed, they brought to the door of the tent of meeting. The kior was used to make the Kohanim holy. It was made from mirrors of women who also wanted to be holy. Water which changed appearance can be used for mikvah, but not for washing one's hands before eating. That's an interesting thing, right? The Shulchan Aruch points out that we've got water, which is perfectly good for a mikvah, but when it comes to food, we don't do that. Why? Eating is so holy. The laws governing the waters necessary to make one pure enough to resemble those of sanctifying Kohanim, and are stricter than the laws of mikvah. That's why it says a Taam V'dat. Shlomo HaMelech established the laws of washing hands before food. Rabbi Akiva used the little water he received while in prison for washing hands rather than drinking, because he would rather die of thirst by his own choice than be punished for Hashem for ignoring the rabbinic rule. That's a powerful idea. Since we are more concerned about potential health danger than legal prohibitions, and since touching food with unwashed hands is considered a danger, it is important to even wash young children's hands before they handle food. That's a halacha mentioned by the Pri Megadim. And on the subject of staying healthy, the rabbis had numerous ideas for living a healthy lifestyle. I didn't really format this well, but I hope to do that better later in the week. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says not to shock your stomach with food that it's not used to. Actually, there's an opinion that that's the reason why. That's the reason why people taste Shabbat food on Erev Shabbat. It's not just to enjoy the food. It's also that your stomach is not shocked on Shabbat when you have unusual food. It's not unusual. You had it on Friday, right? The Gemara in Ketubot tells us that there's a danger of living in an unaccustomed manner. Ketav Sofer adds that includes food. Gemara in Nedarim says you can be released from a neder to avoid eating unhealthy food. The Gemara in Eruvin tells us that Talmid Chacham should eat near vegetables, and there's all kinds of other interesting health discussions there on the bottom of page 55b in Eruvin. And the Gemara in Bava Kama says that eating bread in the morning keeps away illness. Now you have all kinds of health concerns. There's no need to wash before eating bread when water is not easily accessible, though. So even though we mentioned the story from Rabbi Akiva that he would rather die than eat without washing hands, but one should nevertheless wrap one's hands when handling bread. The rabbis teach that washing one's hands with a generous amount of water helps a person receive a generous livelihood. So, don't be skimpy on the water that you're using. An exception is when such blessings come at someone else's expense. This was a reason given by Rav Yisrael Salanta when he washed with just the minimum amount. He said that the Wassertrager, the water carrier, should not have to pay for his blessing. Yaakov Kamenetsky acted similarly. His yahrzeit, by the way, coming up this week, his 40th yahrzeit. And he acted similarly at events where waiters bring waters to venues, explaining that nobody needs to schlep water for his stringencies. Okay, so there you have Parshat Vayakhel. We've got a few minutes left for Parshat Pekudei. It won't take too long because there's only one verse in Parshat Pekudei that I found that has anything to do with food. And so let's get right into it. It's an important verse, though. V'natata et mizbacha ula lifnei petach hamishkan ohel moed. You shall set the altar of burnt offerings before the door of the Mishkan. Mishkan, not tabernacle, for all it's worth, of the tent of meeting.
Sorry, question. What is a tabernacle exactly? Was it trying to be like a table? Like tavern? Like a tavern?
Tabernacle is just a fancy English word for Mishkan. It means
Right.
it's a traveling temple. Yeah.
I'm
And
just
you want?
curious.
I don't know any more about the etymology of that. I'm
Okay.
sure you can look it up.
Okay.
Huh?
Yeah. Oh, because or like phylacteries.
Yes, like
Yeah.
phylacteries. Phylacteries is the Greek or English word for tefillin, whatever that means. I'm sure it means something, but you'd have to look it up in the Oxford English Dictionary, I guess. All right, or probably online now. Anyway, someone who prepares one's table to feed the poor is like someone who brings a sacrifice on the altar, says the Targum Yonasan. Since the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, Rachmana litzlan, our only avenue for the closeness with Hashem we enjoyed there, in the Beit HaMikdash, is to use our tables as places for charity and our food to support the needy. For this reason, there used to be a custom in medieval France to build the coffins of the righteous from the wood of their own tables. Rabbeinu Bachya brings this down. Just like a person brings one's choicest animals for a sacrifice, one should give one's best to the poor. You don't give just your shmatas or what you threw away. Again, like I said before, there's a connection to that earlier verse about the jewelry that the women were wearing that they donated to the Mishkan. Right, was jewelry that was precious to them, not garbage, not trash. Right. A hint to the idea that our tables are comparable to the altar on which incense was burnt is that the letters of the word shulchan, table, form an acronym, shin for shechelet, lamed for levona, chet for chelbana, and nun for nataf. Right? On Onycha, frankincense, galbanum, and stacked, the four species the Torah names of the 11 spices in the incense mixture. So Shulchan actually spells out the four spices that are used for the bisamim. This is they say that in the name of the Vilna Gaon, by the way. Now, the entire world benefits by being blessed with material success and nutritious food when the Beit HaMikdash is standing. Wine libations, for instance, used to ensure that the vineyards of the people donating the wine would grow more produce. That's an idea from the Dat Zakenim, the Tosfot, a previous verse. But again, the idea here being that that's what the Beit Hamikdash was. If the non-Jewish world would only know, says the Gemara, how much blessing comes to the world through the Beit Hamikdash, they would not destroy it. On the other hand, what they would do is they would set up guards to make sure that nothing would ever happen to it. If they only knew how important this thing was. So that's again just a little bit from Parsha Vayakhel and Pekudei. We went a little bit longer than I expected, but Baruch Hashem, I think I hope it was not any. I wasn't stalling in any way. I hope it was all useful information, more for us to appreciate for Shabbat and the holiness of Shabbat, food and the holy potential the food can have, and the health that we need to have in order to do all the beautiful mitzvot that we do. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, I can ask them now that we're pausing the Facebook live feed.
Thank you, Rabbi Yeti, for